Okay, great. So why did you decide to buy out Keyline Capital?
Yeah, so I established Keyline Capital in about just over 2 years ago in 2018 with my business partner at the time, Alex Sutherland. Myself and Alex had sort of different backgrounds. I come from a property development background, and Alex had come more from a operation SME businesses background. But we had run some business together before, so we decided we'd come together and run Keyline Capital with two distinct divisions, me heading up the development division and Alex heading up the operational business division, which worked well for a couple of years. But as things went along, we just wanted to focus more on our own specific areas. So I wanted to just purely focus on the property and development side of things. Alex was happy to focus on the operational business side of things. So we got to a point where it just made sense for us to go our separate ways. So we sort of shook hands and said Alex would take the businesses going forward, and I would obviously carry on with developments, and we just sort of each go in our own direction, which is good because it enabled us to have control of the business. Then we could be essentially the single decision maker as opposed to having to run decisions past each other. It just gave us that control that we both wanted.
And as part of that, what new type of audience are you aiming to reach as a result of emerging property investment opportunities?
Yes, I think the way the business has raised money in the past is historically been from high net worth individuals investing in individual property deals. So what we're trying to do now is make the investments available to a wider audience. So one of the things we're looking at doing is using technology to build an investment platform which lowers the barriers to entry. So people can invest at a much lower level of investment and a much lower cost. So we're actually trying to use blockchain technology to enable people to invest into individual assets from as little as £100 and streamline that process and just make it a lot easier for smaller private investors to access development opportunities, whereas before they may not have had that opportunity. We're still sort of continuing with the traditional way that we've funded developments, which is obviously through high net worth and also looking at institutional investors. But I think opening it up to the smaller private market has benefits for us and for investors as well.
Part of that, I assume, is Keyline Capital's approach to embracing new technologies and taking advantage of digital transformation. Why do you think technology in particular is so important during COVID-19 and after for the property development industry?
Yeah, I think we're sort of all aware of the way living and working conditions have changed during the COVID-19 and crisis. And I think a lot of people are now working from home. I think people's priorities in terms of requirements for a residential development and requirements for an office development have changed substantially due to COVID. So what we've done, we've identified 6 key areas which we think we need to focus on our developments to ensure that they have adapted to the way people are now working. So the things we've come up with is connectivity. Obviously, everyone is now reliant on sort of speed of broadband for meetings and video calls. So that's key to all developments. Amenity space, the ability to go outside and sit somewhere. If you're living in an apartment block, people want to have outdoor space where they can go and get fresh air if they're trapped in the house all day. A separate workspace to living space, that's one of the key things people have said. So rather than having to work at the kitchen table, people want a dedicated work area, whether that's outside of the apartments in a communal office within a block, or whether that's a dedicated area within their apartment. It just allows people to break up living and working whilst working from home. The fourth one is community, having a sense of community in the place where people are living, being able to speak to neighbours, being able to communicate with other people who you're living with. And I think we're using technology a lot more to enable that for residents and tenants. Fifth one, security is always important. So making sure that our developments are secure, but without breaching people's personal privacy. So obviously there's a fine line between levels of security and cameras and systems, but people also knowing that their privacy has not been breached. And then the sixth one we've identified is well-being. Obviously, with the way things have gone with COVID, people want to know that places have been designed with their well-being in mind, and that's something that we're working with partners with on our developments to make sure that well-being is always at the forefront of design in terms of both workspaces and living spaces. So those 6 criteria, what we've identified as what people are looking for post-COVID-19, and we're trying to use technology and working with other partners to incorporate all of those 6 items into both our residential developments and our office commercial developments.
Mm. And then you're also set to focus the development of the business more on Proptech, smart buildings and real estate fintech. Why and how are you going to be able to do this?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's important just to define those terms because they can become a bit confusing when you sort of ban them around. So our understanding of Proptech is the digital transformation of the property industry. So the property industry has always been historically slow to adopt to new technology, I think. But when we say the word Proptech, we just mean that the industry is now developing and using digital technologies. And two examples of those digital technologies are fintech and smart buildings. So fintech, the definition we have of that is essentially technology-based platforms that allow properties to be traded. So a prime example would be something like Rightmove or Zoopla, where people can use that platform to search for a property and in some cases use an online estate agent to enable the transaction to happen without having to deal with a traditional estate agent. Smart buildings refers to technology that facilitates the operation and maintenance of a building. So examples of that would be BIM, building information management systems, which would create a digital replication of an asset. That brings its own benefits in terms of streamlining the design and the construction process, enables problems to be ironed out at the start. So we're looking to actually build our own, at Keyland Capital, build our own platform, which will be initially for utilisation inside the business, but then we'll be rolling out for tenants, both commercial and residential, and it'll become a communications tool, a central portal where all of the building information is kept so everyone can have easy access, and maintenance issues can be raised, and also a communications tool to build back in the 6 key areas that I identified earlier, and how those can be communicated to tenants and to and residential and commercial tenants.
Is that something which you've decided to build as a result of the pandemic, or is that something you were looking to do before?
I think it's something that we've always looked to do before, but I think the pandemic has almost accelerated that process. I think that's probably happened in a lot of ways the property industry has gone. So I think the work from home thing was always happening. It was happening slowly, and I think the change in people's requirements from an office environment was always happening, but it was happening slowly. And I think the COVID-19 pandemic has almost accelerated those. So what may have taken 2 or 3 years before to test working from home has now almost happened in the space of 2 or 3 months. And I think we've proved that these methods of working can happen and should happen, really. And obviously that's within our business, that's just accelerated our efforts to develop that portal, whereas before we may have looked at it as more of a medium to long-term thing. We're now saying, well, this is actually really beneficial for both us as a business and our tenants, so we should sort of prioritise and try to develop it now.
Yeah. In your opinion, how advanced is the property development market currently with regard to technology?
Yeah, I think the industry has historically probably not embraced technological change. It's sort of probably been stuck in the same old ways, and I think some of that comes back to maybe some of the main firm, obviously not blaming anybody, some of the main firms in the industry, I'd say sort of solicitors and agents always have a certain way of working, and that's the way they like working, that's the way that's worked for them. So it's almost like, well, why do we need to change it? I think there has been gradual digitisation over the last decade. Obviously we've had the move to online portals more for sourcing property and also transacting property. We've had more move towards computer-aided design and building information modelling in terms of construction. So we have had gradual change in the industry. I think that there will be further change. I think a couple of the drivers of that will be sort of the pressure from climate change on buildings in terms of making sure that emissions are reduced and that building design is efficient and green as it can be. And also population growth has always been a big driver in terms of moving more people into cities. Obviously, the changes in the way that developments are done in terms of apartment sizes and amenities. But I think the COVID-19 will also have an impact on all of this. So as we mentioned before, there's a lot of changes in the way people are living and working. I think that will have an impact in how technology is used to address those, really. These are all things we're trying to pick up on. Obviously, things are changing very fast, and I've tried to keep up to date with how things are changing in the market post COVID-19. But I think all of what's happened will result in new technologies, new ways of doing things coming out that will affect the property market.
Do you think there will be a bigger push towards modern methods of construction as a result?
Yeah, I think modern methods of construction has always been there, and I think it's definitely working well in certain areas. I think that the problem with it has always been that a lot of developers and a lot of contractors, when building out a project, always come back to cost. Unfortunately, cost is always the key driver, and when those modern methods of construction may make savings on construction time on site or labour requirements, potentially they're more expensive from a materials point of view, and sometimes people in the industry can be a little bit short-sighted and say, well, you know what, it's just not worth making that change, disrupting the way we've normally done things when it's cost neutral. So that's probably why it's been a little bit slower to filter through. But I think it will change in terms of the student market and sort of apartment market. The sort of unitised way of building those developments has used off-site construction, sort of bringing pods onto site, which speeds up the construction time. And I think those all have benefits for the industry, but ultimately it's just going to come down to developers and contractors integrating those methods and accepting that even if there's not cost savings to be made, those are the best methods of construction. Yeah.
How else will you've mentioned a few things already that you've got up your sleeve for this year, but how else will Keyland be disrupting the property development industry?
Yeah, so one of the key things that we're looking at, which we've been working on for the past 6 months, is trying to use blockchain to enable investors to invest in our properties. So blockchain is essentially like a shared database with no centralized control. So there's a number of benefits in terms of security and trust and sharing information across multiple places. So we're looking to use a blockchain-enabled platform, which we're developing, to allow investors to invest in our properties. And what I touched on before, that will lower the barriers to entry, and it will open up the investments to a much wider pool of private investors that can invest a smaller amount of money. So we're hoping to launch that in conjunction with our new property portal sometime over the summer. So that's one of the key things we're working on. And obviously looking at adapting our developments in the post-COVID-19 environment to make sure we pick up on those key criteria of our tenants.
And because I'm aware that that Keyland develops in the West Midlands, will you continue to develop in that area, or will you be expanding into other regions? Yeah,
so our prime focus will still be in the West Midlands. I always say it's within a 50-mile radius of Birmingham, but we have been involved in schemes sort of further south. So predominantly we'll still be looking for new developments in that area, but it may be that we go a little bit further south depending on what's available in the market. Yeah.
And you mainly provide housing for students and professionals, as well as delivering office to resi conversions. What challenges and opportunities does the PBSA and office to residential market face?
Yeah, so I think there's a number of challenges in the student sector at the moment, obviously with students not being at university. So I think a number of universities have talked around continuing the online learning and actually not having students back until either October or even the start of the new calendar year next year. So I think that is a challenge for student accommodation sector as a whole. Obviously, they're reliant on students moving to where the university is and living in situ. So I think the way that develops will be interesting, and whether that has an effect in terms of it makes more courses move online, it could result in a sort of structural change, really, in terms of the fact that rather than students always having to be on campus, some courses may be delivered as just an online only course. We just don't know how that's going to go. I think that there's always going to be a need for student accommodation. Certain courses can't be done online just by their very nature. And I would say that it's probably going to be a difficult year for the student market, but we'd be optimistic that sort of by January next year, it would be back to normal way of operating. In terms of the office to residential market, the challenges of that has been the stock, really, available stock. Obviously, that permitted development right has been in place for a number of years now, and a lot of the buildings that have been converted already have been in sort of the prime locations and the best buildings that have been available for conversion. I think we've got to a point now, a number of years down the line, where there's just not as many buildings available that can be converted to residential. I know there is talk of within the government changing the planning rules to introduce further development rights for industrial as well, and I think that will probably be the next big thing that will come through, should that get approved in the summer, whereby permitted development will be in place for industrial B2 and B8 units. And I think there'll be a big surge in demand for those type of properties that can then be converted to residential.
Do you see if they're becoming a lot more stock on the market as offices potentially might, people might move away from them, as we've seen during this period? Yeah,
I think there will be a change in the office market, because I think obviously with social distancing and businesses returning to the office, that there's going to be less people in the office, but I think that those people that are in the office will require more space, just because you can't have a bank of 6 desks with people sitting opposite each other. It's just not going to be permitted now. So I think there will be a structural change in the office and the way that people will work from home more, but I think the office will be used in different ways. I don't think the requirement for businesses having an office will go away. I think it will just be different. Whether that is that businesses decide they don't need a city centre office, they don't need to be paying premium rents, they could have an office in the outskirts of the city or in the suburbs. I think there'll definitely be a structural change, but I don't see vast amounts of office space suddenly becoming available. I think it will just be used in a very different way.
And lastly, a question which is always popular with our readers on DFT: how did you get into the industry?
So I trained as an accountant originally, qualified as a chartered accountant, and then I went to work in my father's construction business. So I worked there for about 6 or 7 years. I got exposed to the construction industry through that. It was a contracting business. Then started doing small developments. So I bought a buy-to-let property with a piece of land on the side, and I got planning for a single build house on the side. So that was my very first development, and built that. Then I just gradually grew that. So I bought another plot with, got planning for 3 houses and developed that. Then I just gradually scaled it up. Then I moved into the permitted developments when that change in the planning law came about, and just gradually scaled up. So definitely not an overnight thing, but taking it step by step, just increasing the size of the scheme each time.
If you weren't in development, what would you be doing?
I'd probably still be a finance director somewhere, I'd say. So obviously I ended up being a finance director in a construction business. If I didn't go full-time into development, I'd probably still be an accountant somewhere in some form of SME business, whether that be a construction or a manufacturing business, and just crunching numbers there probably somewhere. Yeah.